Under the cover of darkness, Obina dragged a black goat towards the shrine of Agouko, its hooves scraping against dry earth. But the goat was never the true offering. His own brother's blood was. By midnight, one man would walk home and one would not. And the herbalist standing at that shrine had already decided which. She just hadn't told either brother yet. This is the story of Umudike village, where a father's inheritance split two sons down the middle, where envy grew quietly for 3 years before it reached for a blade, and where one old woman's judgment changed everything before the new moon rose. Umudike sat where 3 rivers met, its soil dark and rich enough that elders swore the ancestors themselves had chosen the land. But the same elders warned that fertile ground remembered everything planted in it, including betrayal. Eze Okonkwo raised 2 sons in that village, Chidi, the elder by a single year, and Obina, the younger, always chasing the space his brother occupied without trying. From childhood, the difference showed itself in small ways nobody thought to name. Chidi finished his farm work before sundown. Obina left his half done and blamed the soil. Chidi settled disputes among the younger boys with patience. Obina started most of them. Their father noticed but said nothing, not until illness took him in his 53rd year, leaving behind yam barns, palm groves, and a question the whole village would soon be forced to answer. Tradition in Umudike demanded that a council of 9 elders name the successor when no clear firstborn instruction existed. They gathered under the Udala tree 3 days after the burial rites, and after listening to both sons speak, and after walking the land both had worked, they named Chidi. Obina stood in the crowd and smiled the way a man smiles when he's already decided to remember the moment as an injustice. He told himself it meant nothing. He told his wife, Ijoma, that titles didn't fill barns, hard work did. But over the following months, hard work stopped being the point. What mattered was that market women greeted Chidi first. What mattered was that when disputes arose between neighboring compounds, they walked past Obina's gate to knock on Chidi's. What mattered was that Chidi's yam harvest that year filled 2 extra barns, while Obina's barely covered his family's needs through the dry season. Ijoma noticed her husband changing before he admitted it to himself. He stopped visiting his brother's compound. He stopped attending gatherings where Chidi might be praised. He started asking questions in the market that weren't really questions, about old rituals, about the kind of sacrifice that could shift a man's fortune from one hand to another. Word of a question like that, in a village like Umudike, always finds its way to the person best equipped to answer it. Mama Ineka's hut sat where the farmland gave way to forest, close enough to the village to be reached before dark, far enough that most children were warned never to wander there alone. She had buried 3 husbands and outlived 2 of her own children, and villagers said grief had either hollowed her out or made her impossible to lie to. Most believed the second. Obina arrived at her hut on a moonless evening, a black goat in tow, and asked for a ritual he'd clearly rehearsed in his head for weeks. He wanted a midnight sacrifice at Aguuku, the kind old men whispered about but rarely performed anymore. One meant to transfer a rival's fortune to the one who offered the blood. He didn't say his brother's name. He didn't have to. Mama Ineka studied him for a long moment before answering. She told him the sacrifice existed and that she would prepare it exactly as the old ways demanded. What she did not tell him was that the old ways required more than a goat and a grudge. They required the shrine itself to judge the true offense between the two men standing before it. Obinna left that night believing he'd secured his brother's death. Mama Ineka spent the following week doing something Obinna never anticipated. She walked. She visited the market women who had watched both brothers grow. She sat with the farm hands who worked Chidi's land and years editorial Obinna's. She spoke with an old friend of Ijeoma's who mentioned, almost in passing, an ox that having drowned in the river 2 years back, an ox that blinded to Chidi, lost the same week Obinna had been seen walking that river bank alone. She heard too about whispers that having retrieved the council regarding Chidi's wife, whispers that tracing back to no one anyone could name except quietly to Obinna. By the time the new moon arrived, Mama Ineka understood exactly what she was walking into. Obinna sent word to Chidi that their late father's spirit had appeared to the herbalist, demanding both sons return to Agouku to settle unfinished matters. Chidi, who had never once questioned his duty to his family, arrived at the shrine without hesitation, without suspicion, carrying nothing but the quiet trust that had defined him his whole life. Torches lit the clearing. The black goat stood tethered near the shrine stone. Mama Neka waited in silence until both brothers stood before her, and then she began the rite exactly as tradition required. The invocation, the ash markings, the ceremonial knife raised into torchlight. Obinna's heart pounded, caught somewhere between guilt and the hunger he'd been feeding for 3 years. Then Mama Neka turned the blade, not toward Chidi, but toward the goat tethered beside the shrine stone. The animal's blood spilled across the earth as she spoke words that silenced even the night insects around them. The sacrifice tonight was never meant to take a man's life, she said, her voice carrying across the clearing. It was meant to reveal which man had already killed something inside himself. She turned to Obinna. She spoke of the drowned ox. She spoke of the whispers against Chidi's wife that had somehow always started near Obinna's compound. She told both brothers that the shrine would mark the guilty heart before the next full moon rose, visible to anyone who looked. Chidi stood frozen, staring at the brother he'd trusted his entire life. Obinna said nothing at all. Within days, a fever spread across Obinna's skin in patterns the eldest women of Umudike recognized on sight. The shrine's judgment, unmistakable, undeniable, spreading faster than the Harmattan wind carried gossip through the market. He was dragged before the Council of 9 beneath the same Udala tree where Chidi had once been named heir. This time, Obinna had no smile left to hide behind. He confessed to the ox. He confessed to the whispers against Chidi's wife. And finally, voice breaking, he confessed to the message that had lured his brother to a shrine where he'd hoped Chidi would never leave alive. The council fell silent, waiting for Chidi to demand the harshest punishment tradition allowed. He didn't. Chidi asked the council for something no one expected. Not banishment, but a season. He asked that Obinna work beside him on the very farmland he'd spent 3 years resenting, under Mama Nneka's watch, until the fever marks and whatever had caused them finally lifted. Mama Nneka agreed, on the condition that Obinna's labor be real, not symbolic. Through planting season and into harvest, the two brothers walked the same soil side by side for the first time since childhood. Slowly, the marks on Obinna's skin faded. More slowly still, something between the brothers began to mend that neither of them could name out loud. By the next dry season, Umudike watched two brothers walk to market together, and for once, nobody whispered about why. Obinna didn't lose his brother's trust at the shrine. He lost it 3 years earlier, the day he decided another man's success was a personal insult. Everything after that, the ox, the whispers, the midnight plot, was just envy finally running out of patience. That's what Mama Nneka's judgment really exposed. It's never the sacrifice that reveals a man's heart. It's what he's willing to sacrifice to get even. Here's my question for you. If the shrine had marked your skin the way it marked Obinna's, would your own family recognize the pattern before you did? Be honest in the comments. Some of you already know someone living Obinna's story right now. And if this story kept you here till the end, the next story on this channel won't let you go either.